Conversations with Azu Ishekwene.
Hello. When we say Nigeria happens to us, even when we're the ones who happened to Nigeria, it didn't just start yesterday. The seeds were implanted right from the time of the colonialists. A posthumous memoir by Harold Smith, a former colonial administrator, indicates all of this. On October 1, Nigeria marked its 65th anniversary of independence from colonial rule. But is 65 years enough to measure the progress of a country? A peer review of countries like India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Argentina, and Brazil, and other countries so colonized indicates that something is wrong with Nigeria beyond a colonial legacy. Indeed, we still speak wistfully about Nigeria's potential for greatness, a potential that appears no less elusive today than it was when the colonialists left. Welcome to Conversation with Azu, our weekly diary on life and politics. Our column is titled How to Drink from a Poisoned Cup, Harold Smith and the Nigerian Story. It's a book review that is relevant, timely, and authentic. And the writer of this column, Azu, is with me in the studio to take some questions. Welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me, Julius. Thank you.
All right. You were 60 years in February, and Nigeria was 65 years a few days back.
That's correct.
You were Nigeria was 5 years old at the time you were born, or approximately that. Tell me, give me an impression you had as a young man growing up in the early 60s, mid 60s through the early 70s. Did Nigeria happen to you then?
I do not think I have many solid memories of the 60s. Obviously, between when I was born and the 70s was just 5 years. But I think the memories I had of that time are memories of the Civil War, which obviously broke 2 years after I was born. I was 2 years and my parents were in Port Harcourt. My father was then working at the Nigerian Ports Authority, when the war broke. And, so not very pleasant memories, I'm afraid, because we had to, my mom and dad, I still remember my aunt telling me, who took care of me during most of the war. So my mom and dad, the way the war tore families apart, as it still tears families apart whenever and wherever it occurs today. And I remember my aunt telling me many years later that there was a time when, we got to a point that we're somewhere around Uzoakoli, which was really at the heart, and that I was saying to her that, look, she should not allow mosquitoes to bite me, that my mother said. I didn't know there was something more. The bullets were flying left, right, and center, and I can just imagine my poor aunt. So he's talking about mosquitoes. We are talking about bullets taking people out, and you are talking, but those are the memories. Of course, we moved from Port Harcourt, finally found our way to what was then the Midwest. And then later, after the war in 1970, we went to Lagos. So, yes, those were just mostly memories of the Civil War.
Both interesting and sad. So let me just dive straight to your column, and I'll start from the end. It reads like a map of where Nigeria's corpses were buried, figuratively speaking.
I get that.
Yes. What can Nigeria do with the Harold Smith story, like you asked in your very last?
Well, yes. I think I do not believe in what political scientists called political determinism. It's just this high-sounding phrase that sort of says essentially that how far you go may ultimately be a function of some of the congenital flaws, especially if it's of a colonial kind. Because as you also said in your intro, there are countries that were also colonized but have also managed to deal extensively with some of those challenges and are growing to the full potential. So I do think that with better focus on institution building, social cohesion in the country, with better accountability, if we hold people more accountable, and more greater sense of civic responsibility, I'm afraid. I think that probably will begin to turn the corner. I do not believe that all hope. I do not believe that all hope is lost. I'm also not one to say that Nigeria has not made any progress. Like some people say, oh, Nigeria has 65 years. Nothing. No, I don't believe that. But if you also compare those who had independence with us at the same time, of course, I do admit that as conditions and circumstances in many cases are not exactly the same. But there are also those that had worse experiences that have managed to turn it around. I mean, look at Rwanda. That's a fairly recent example of a country that 1994 was, beset
Totally torn
massively,
apart.
torn apart by genocide. But see what that country is managing to make of itself. So all hope is not lost, but we have to be more intentional, in my view, to build the country of our dream.
Just to follow up quickly on that, Smith says 60 years in the life of a country is a very short period, and he alludes to it being like a raindrop in a storm. That suggests that we're too much in a hurry to measure our progress, or what do you
No. I do not think we are in a hurry. Um, I don't think we are in a hurry to measure our progress. I think it's okay to ask questions, but I do not think we need to go into. We do not have to stay in one spot and just be beating ourselves over the head, asking the same questions, or doing the same sort of things that we did that brought us where we are, and then expect a different result. I think we need to be more intentional in how we make progress, in how we build our institutions, in how we create a society that gives a fair shake to all, in how we build our communities, in the sort of values that we espouse and defend. I think there are areas that we need to be more intentional in committing ourselves to rebuilding this country. And I do not think all hope is lost, but we need to be far more intentional. And I also do not think that it's too much to ask of ourselves, that we need to give more to make our country what we all desire to be.
All right, thank you very much. Very fundamental issues that were raised in Harold Smith's story is that he refused to rig elections against the action group and refused to rig the census in favor of the northern region. Yet, those objectives were still achieved in spite of his refusal. So, fast forward to the present era where elections and census conducted by Nigerians remain perpetually in dispute. Is Britain still to blame?
No, of course not. You can no longer. I'm not suggesting for once, but you see, when you rig a system, to straighten a crooked system takes a while, and it takes intentionality. So we have, unfortunately, a legacy of a very crooked system, and there are vested interests who over the years have benefited from this sort of status quo. It's not easy, it's not. Power game is not one that is served a la carte. You have to actually take it. You understand? And so it's not. Nobody is suggesting that Britain is. But even though I see often that those who, especially in other parts of the world, who like to pontificate about how corrupt and how badly run Nigeria is, I think they should be more modest. If they themselves remember the role that they have played and still continue to play many, as just to perpetuate the current situation. But it's up to us. You understand that? I believe that it's up to us and not to them to make the sort of turnaround that we desire for our country.
It is up to us to make a turnaround, and we'll take a break as I read an excerpt for you from Azu's very interesting article. I quote, "If complicity in politics by civil servants date back to the 1950s, the hijacking of the state resources by politicians to enrich themselves remains a persistent issue. The British could neither trust Obafemi Awolowo nor stand his independent mindedness. They also suspected that left to its own, the NPC, that's the Northern People's Congress, would lose the federal election of 1959. So they used politicians like Festus Okotie-Eboh to prop up the insolvent NCNC, that's the National Congress of Nigeria and Cameroon, whose leadership had wrecked the African Continental Bank in an alliance with the NPC." End of quote. Reality check from Harold Smith's story indicates a continuation of economic colonization beyond Britain. Textile factories, when I say beyond Britain, I mean it's gone global.
Yeah,
China,
yeah,
America,
sure.
and
I
everyone
get
is taking part in it. Our textile factories, our car assembly plants, our oil and steel industries have become monumental failures. Surely we could have changed the trajectory in all of these 65 years.
Yes, we can, and we are in a few areas. For example, in arts, music, and entertainment, we're doing quite a bit in those areas. Fortunately, we just had a refinery by the Dangote refinery also, which is part of the asset. There's also a conscious and deliberate effort in many areas to see how we reset and rebuild. So yes, we're making some progress in some areas, but there's still a whole lot more to be done. And as I said, we also need to be more intentional in how we build institutions that hold public officers to account. And citizens also, that sense of civic responsibility of citizens, of seeing ourselves as one, of having it. I mean, I was at the public presentation of the book by General Liorabo called Scars, and he was trying to, sort of documented his experience as a war general, Boko Haram, and Bishop Matthew Hazan Kuka reviewed the book. And the former NSA General Mongono talked in extenso about social cohesion, how Nigerians, for no just reasons, the way and politicians is something that politicians have perfected the art of weaponizing. Ethnicity, religion, tribe, and these are things that keep tearing and pulling us apart. These are issues I think that we need to deal with to build the sort of nation that we all desire to live.
All right, to bring this to a close, my final question. In most of Africa, where Britain, bequeathed the parliamentary system of government, almost entirely they've, rejigged it and changed it to a presidential system. Presidential system is more prone to dictatorship and manipulation. Again, should we blame the empire for all of this?
No, so the fault is, as they say, Shakespeare says, the fault is not really in our stars, but in us that we have failed to take the opportunities. I don't think it's essentially
the system.
It doesn't matter how many times or how frequently you change the system. Systems are important. All right, and checks and balances in systems consequences are also important. But if the operators of the system are determined to wreck the system, they always will, especially if they know that they will wreck the system without consequences. I think we have reached a point in this country where, and I think the structure of the country is one of the things we need to deal with. And I'm not suggesting, this is not tongue-in-cheek, I'm not suggesting that once you deal with the structure, that everything else is solved. But that also helps people to, at different levels of government, to then learn to hold their people more accountable. And the recruitment process, especially recruitment process into politics, which is a very major industry in Nigeria. You have this system in this country where if you don't have tons of money, it doesn't matter where you get that money from. You really cannot go into politics where you can play and significantly influence policy in such a way that it affects the lives of citizens. I think we need to look again at our political system, and each of the states or regions or whatever they call zones, or which is what we now call them, can to a certain extent cooperate, but still have a certain degree of liberty to be free of the obesity of a center called Abuja, to be able to run things in a way that people in that locality can rise without committing too much, and then hold people who have been appointed to public offices to account.
Thank you. Azu has a way with books, and the Harold Smith story is a book. But if you can't find the book, you can at least find a good analysis on it on Conversation with Azu. Just visit our site at azuishekone.com and you'll find it there. Thank you for coming on the show, Azu.
Thanks for having me once again, Julius, and happy Independence Anniversary.
Happy Independence to all of you Nigerians. Bye for now.
Conversations with Azu Ishekwene.